האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov, good evening, Dobra V'Etcher. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Vayigash, Os Test, section number 9. We're going to read a pasuk from the Parsha, and then we'll jump right into the words of the Zera Shimshon. This is Perek Vav, pasuk Aleph, and the pasuk is talking about what happened after Yosef revealed himself to his brothers, revealed his identity, and told the brothers to go home and tell Yaakov, the father, that he was still alive and to bring everyone back down to Mitzrayim where Yosef could take care of them and feed them and support them. So after that, this is what is next said. Vayisa Yisrael v'chol asher lo. And Yisrael, that of course is the other name for Yaakov Avinu, traveled, and everything that was his whole family, all their belongings, they all traveled. They left Eretz Canaan. Vayovo Be'er Sheva, or they were in the process of leaving Eretz Canaan, and they came to Be'er Sheva. Vayizbach Zevachim, and Yaakov offered sacrifices, Lelokei Aviv Yitzchak, to the God of his father Yitzchak. That's what the pasuk tells us. And now let's get right into the words of the Zera Shimshon. Pasuk, Vayizbach Zevachim Lelokei Aviv Yitzchak. And Yaakov brought offerings to the God of his father Yitzchak. Perish Rashi. Rashi explains, Mikan, from here, from this pasuk, Shechayav Adam Bichvod Aviv, we see that a person is obligated more in the honor of his father, Yoser Mikevod Zekeno, more than the honor of his elder father, meaning his grandfather. Ad kan Lashono, until here is a quote from Rashi. So Rashi appears to be teaching us that from the fact that Yaakov offered these sacrifices and used the language of, I'm offering sacrifices to the God of my father Yitzchak, rather than saying to the God of Avraham, by choosing to do so, Rashi says it teaches us that Yaakov had an obligation to honor his father Yitzchak more than his grandfather Avraham, and that's why he mentioned Yitzchak here. Continuing, Makshim ha'olam, the world asks, meaning many commentators ask, Ma kusha hirgish Rashi, what problem did Rashi feel b'pasuk zeh, in this pasuk? What problem, what issue did Rashi have? What question did Rashi have with this pasuk that led him to offer this interpretation? Did Dilma also zivachim, because perhaps Yaakov brought these sacrifices, lelokei aviv Yitzchak, to the God of his father Yitzchak, mipnei shehaya aviv, because Yitzchak was his father. Velo mipnei hakavod, and not because of a particular understanding that Yaakov had about the mitzvah of honoring his father Yitzchak before his grandfather Avraham. So let's explain this question that's being asked on Rashi's commentary. What the Zera Shimshon is telling us is that the pasuk seemingly could have been understood very easily without Rashi having to say, oh, there's something unusual here, and it's coming to teach us a special obligation that people have to honor their fathers more, and that takes priority, that takes precedence over honoring their grandfathers. Zera Shimshon says that, where is that all coming from? All Rashi had to do was accept the pasuk, so to speak, at face value and understand it in the following way. A person generally is closer to his father than he is to his grandfather. Grandfathers, of course, grandparents are very beloved, but in general, a person feels a closeness to his parents. In this case, Yaakov felt a closeness to Yitzchak, perhaps more than to his grandfather, Avram, from the previous generation. And that's why he said, Elokei Aviv Yitzchak. He was closer to his father. He personally had seen his father daven and worship Hashem more often, and was more intimate with how his father He had more intimate knowledge of how his father Yitzchak worshipped Hashem. So let's just learn the pasuk that way, the Zera Shimshon says. It wasn't, we don't have to learn the pasuk that Yaakov made a conscious choice and thought to himself, I have to either honor my father Yitzchak here, or I have to honor my grandfather Avram here by mentioning one of them. I'll choose to honor my father Yitzchak by mentioning him in connection to these sacrifices because I have an obligation to honor him more than an obligation to honor my grandfather. Zera Shimshon says that whole drush, that whole interpretation, the whole way of understanding the pasuk doesn't seem to be necessary when you could understand the pasuk at face value, as we said. Next paragraph. V'nira lomar. It would appear to say, the Shapir hochiach Rashi, that Rashi was correct in bringing a proof that chayov adam v'chule, that a person is obligated to honor one's father before one honors one's grandfather, that actually is something we can learn from this text. Mishum dekashale, because Rashi had a problem. The hocha adarabba, here in this particular case, when Yaakov was about to go down to Mitzrayim and he brings these korbanos, he's on his way to go down to Mitzrayim and he brings these korbanos, just the opposite is true. Yaakov lo hayolo lizboach ela dafka lelokei Avraham. It wouldn't make sense in this particular situation for Yaakov to offer korbanos unless they were offered in connection to his grandfather Avraham. That's what we would have expected to see in the pasuk that Yaakov would say. It should have said lelokei aviv Avraham, to his father or his grandfather Avraham. Shahare ata, because now hayeholech leMitzrayim, Yaakov was on his way to Mitzrayim, lehaschil hashibud, to begin the servitude. Yaakov knew well from the tradition that had been passed down to the families. Yaakov knew well that when he went down to Mitzrayim, it was not just going down for a little vacation or a little rest stop. Yaakov knew, I'm going down with the whole family, and this is the beginning of the foretold and the prophesied servitude, the exile, the golus to Mitzrayim. Shegozar HaKodesh Baruch Hu im Avraham. And Hashem had made this decree back to Avraham, to Yaakov's grandfather. Yodoa Teda v'chule, you should surely know. Hashem had told Avraham that you should surely know what's going to happen in the future, that your descendants will be in service, will be subjugated by a foreign nation. Ve'Yaakov kodem sheyelech leMitzrayim, and Yaakov before he brought sacrifices, before he went to Mitzrayim, also zvachim, he brought these korbanos, these sacrifices, kedei lehispalel leHakodesh Baruch Hu, in order to daven to Hashem sheyotziem misham, that Hashem should take the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim. K'moshe amru zichronim levracha, as Chazal say, Anochi ereid imcha Mitzrayima. Hashem said, I will go down with you to Mitzrayim, va'anochi alcha gam alo, and I will also come up and rise up from Mitzrayim. U'k'moshe evtiach la'Avraham, like Hashem promised Avraham, the Games Hagoy Asher Ya'avodu, also the nation that the Jewish people are enslaved to, that they serve, Don Anochi, I will judge them in the end, V'achrechein Yetzu, and afterwards the Jewish people will go out, B'rechush Gadol, with great wealth. So Avraham was the perfect person to be mentioned in connection to these sacrifices that Yaakov was bringing, because Avraham was the person who received the message from Hashem and that the Jews would be enslaved in a foreign nation, and the promise that that Hashem would redeem them and bring them out of servitude and take them out of bondage. So it would seem obvious that Yaakov should say, when he brings these particular offerings on his way leaving the land of Canaan, going down to Mitzrayim, where he knows it will be the beginning of the foreign servitude, he should, of course, say, Elokei Avraham. I'm bringing offerings to the God of Avraham, meaning the God who told Avram this was going to happen and who promised Avram that he would redeem the Jewish people from their land of servitude. So we would expect Yaakov, 100%, we would expect him, when he brings these korbanos, to say, I'm bringing korbanos to the God of my grandfather Avraham. V'hakorban hazeh hoyo lo lomar. And therefore, this sacrifice that Yaakov was bringing, he should have said, okay, Aviv Avram, it was being brought to the God of his father or his grandfather, Abraham. Kedei sheyekayim HaKadosh Baruch Hu ma shehivtiach lo. And he would be mentioning Avram in order to say, Hashem, please remember and fulfill to keep that which you promised to Abraham, not just to bring the Jewish people down to a foreign nation, but to redeem them from there. V'lama asa hakorban lelokei aviv Yitzchak. So that's where the question comes in that Rashi was bothered by. Why did Yaakov Avinu make these korbanos in connection to his father Yitzchak and pass up the clear alternative of bringing these korbanos and connecting them to his grandfather Avraham, which would have seemed so much more appropriate and so much more straightforward. Next paragraph. But certainly we are compelled to say, she'asa kain bishvil shechayov adam v'chvod avi v'chulei. It must be that Yaakov mentioned his father Yitzchak because he felt a sense of obligation that took priority for his father Yitzchak, to mention his father Yitzchak more than he felt that he needed to honor his father Avraham, his grandfather Avraham, by mentioning him. Also lo kavod zeh, and Yaakov did this act of honor to his father Yitzchak, lehispalel leHakadosh Baruch Hu, to daven to Hashem sheyiftem min hagolus, that Hashem should redeem the Jewish people from this exile that was starting, b'schus Yitzchak, in the merit of Yitzchak. Hoil shemimenu hischil hagolus, because from him, from Yitzchak, the exile began. What does that mean, that the exile began with Yitzchak? Yitzchak never left Eretz Canaan. Yitzchak never went down to Mitzrayim. So what does it mean the exile began with Yitzchak? Kedichsiv, as the pasuk says, Ki ger yihiyeh zar'acha. Your children will be strangers in a foreign land. Umiyom leidoso, from the birth of Yitzchak, nishlamu arba meo shana. We can complete the count of 400 years only if we count it from the birth of Yitzchak. Let's pause here for a moment to make sure we understand what Zera Shimshon is saying. There's a fundamental idea that can be found in Chazal and in different commentaries and Midrashim, that when Hashem talked about Bnei Yisrael being in a foreign land for 400 years, that doesn't seem to make sense, because Bnei Yisrael were not in Mitzrayim for 400 years. The numbers don't add up. However, if you count the beginning of the 400 years from the birth of Yitzchak, then it does equal 400 years from the birth of Yitzchak till when Bnei Yisrael came out of Mitzrayim. Why does it make sense to count from the birth of Yitzchak? Because when Yitzchak was born, he in fact was the child of Avraham, who was born in a foreign land. At that time, Eretz Canaan did not yet belong to the Jewish people. Hashem had not yet given it to the Jewish people. That was only going to happen later. And it didn't, and therefore you could truthfully say, I should say accurately say about Yitzchak, when he was born, he was fulfilling the idea that Hashem said to Avram, your children will be in a foreign land. Yitzchak was born in a land that had to be considered foreign. At that time, it was the land that belonged to the Canaanim and the other nations that lived there, even though it was destined to belong to Abraham's descendants. So therefore, it made sense for Yaakov to connect the korbanos to Yitzchak, because Yitzchak had a connection to the Golus Mitzrayim, which started, the 400 years started from his birth. That's the Zera Shimshon's first approach. He's about to offer a second, an entirely different second approach. But at this point already, we understand how he has answered the question on Rashi. Why did Rashi come up with this whole idea of Yaakov being obligated to honor his father Yitzchak more than his grandfather Abraham? The answer is because everything would point to Yaakov, when he brought the korbanos, connecting them to his grandfather Abraham, and not to his father Yitzchak. But he went ahead and he connected them to his father Yitzchak. How could he do that? Why did he do that, I should say? It's because of the obligation that Rashi is teaching us about, the obligation that he had to honor his father. And then as a follow-up to that, Zera Shimshon says, okay, he had to honor his father, but perhaps he should have honored him in other ways. What connection did Yitzchak have to going down to the Golus in Mitzrayim? And obviously it had to make some sense for him to connect these korbanos to his father Yitzchak and not to his grandfather Avram. And there the Zera Shimshon answers that Yitzchak was also connected to the Golus, which actually began with his birth. Continuing in the next paragraph. Ve'od yesh lomar, and we can also say, sheyodua shetam Golus Mitzrayim. It is known, and when the Zera Shimshon uses that term, he means it's known from Kabbalistic sources. It is known that the reason of the exile of the Jewish people to Mitzrayim, Hoya, was lelaket kol hanitzotzo shenaflu sham, to gather in all of the spiritual sparks that had fallen there. V'zeh shekosuv, and this is alluded to in the pasuk Vayelaket Yosef as kol hakesef. Yosef, while he was the viceroy of Paro and was in charge of making plans to make sure that people had food to eat, he collected all of the money from the people of Mitzrayim. And that's an allusion to the fact that in the future, the Jewish people knew they would have a task of collecting all of the spiritual sparks that were in Mitzrayim. Kemoshe kosvu chochmei ha'emes, as the scholars of the Kabbalah wrote about this. V'zehu besod shel, and this is also hidden in the pasuk Vayenatzlu es Mitzrayim. When Bnei Yisrael left Mitzrayim, the pasuk, the Torah says, and they emptied out Egypt. Asa'uha kim mitzula she'ein ba dagim. They made Egypt look like a net that was empty of fish. They emptied out all of the wealth of Mitzrayim. And again, that's the pasuk is talking about the physical wealth of Mitzrayim, but it's hinting to, in a hidden way, emptying out whatever spirituality and nitzotzo, sparks of spirituality, were in Mitzrayim. Next page, top of the right column. Umishum hachi huzharu. And because of this, the Jews were warned, they were prohibited, shelo loshuv od b'Mitzrayim, not to return to Mitzrayim. It says in the Torah that Hashem said after he took us out from Mitzrayim, we shouldn't return to Mitzrayim. Lefi shelo nishar ba, because there is not remaining in it, in Mitzrayim, shum davar tov, anything that is good. All of the spirituality has been emptied from Mitzrayim. V'zehu hasod, and this is also a hidden meaning, shel v'acharechein yetzu b'ruchush gadol. When Hashem said to Abraham, after the Jews leave this land of bondage, they will go out with great wealth. And that's also hinting to the fact that they'll come out with all of the spirituality that was in Mitzrayim. They'll gather it in and take it out with them. As we've explained at length previously, and you can see that was in Parshas Lech Lecha, Va'af Meseches Psachim, and this is also stated by Chazal in a Gemara in Meseches Psachim, Pei Zayin, on page Pei Zayin. Amrinon, we say, Lo Hegla V'chule, the Jews were not exiled, were not sent into exile, Ela Kedei Sheyitosvu, except in order to become even larger, V'chule, etc. Klum Adam Zoreya saw, the Gemara says, gives an analogy. Does a person ever plant a specific measure of seeds in order to then harvest that amount? No, a person plants seeds in order to harvest much more than the seeds he planted. So too, Hashem sent the Jewish people into exile in Mitzrayim in order to come back with even more people, even more than the Jewish people that were there. The concept here is that that one of the functions of going into exile, of the Jewish people going into exile, is for them to connect with non-Jews in the land of exile and bring them in and have those people convert. And then when the Jews are redeemed from that exile, they will be an even larger nation because of all of the, so to speak, sparks, all of these spiritual neshamas, these souls that need to join up, that crave and need to join up with the Jewish people. And that's what happened in Golus Mitzrayim. Vehine, next paragraph, Vehine ikar ha'hachono la'nitzotzos, and the main preparation that was made for these sparks, sheyismashchu min haklipos, that they should be pulled away from the sources of impurity. Literally, klipos means shells, but in Kabbalistic language, it's a reference to powerful forces of impurity. Also, Osam Avraham. Avraham made the preparations. Avraham's work during his lifetime was to make preparations for the sparks to be ultimately brought in and rejoined with the Jewish people, sparks of holiness and spirituality. Kedichsiv, as the pasuk says regarding Avraham, v'es hanefesh asher osu v'charan, the souls that they made in Haran. What does it mean they made souls? Avraham and Sarah went around meeting with men in Avram's case and women in Sarah's case, teaching them about monotheism, teaching them about Hashem, and connecting with them and bringing them on board to serve Hashem. She'oz huchnu kol haneshamos ha'asidos lehiskayer. Those activities by Avram and Sarah laid the groundwork and formed a type of preparation for all of the future souls that would come and convert and join the Jewish people. Not just the people that Avram and Sarah converted, but Avram and Sarah were laying the groundwork and building up the power so that to help future Gerim join the Jewish people long after Avram and Sarah had left this world. V'zeh sod ha-pasuk, and this is the secret meaning of the pasuk, v'nivrachu v'cha. This pasuk is stated regarding Avraham, and it says, there will be blessed through you the nations of all of the families of the earth. Ha'omor ba'Avram, which was stated by Avraham. Miloshon havrachas ha'ilon. But this word v'nivrachu doesn't just mean they will be blessed from the language of bracha. It also can be understood from a language of havrachas ha'ilon, layering of a tree, which means as follows. When you layer a tree, or you do something in Hebrew called havracha, you take branches of the tree, you bend them down to the ground, and then you cover the branch with dirt until it's covered, and only a little part at the end of the branch is sticking up. And then you wait for that part to grow and send down new roots. And ultimately, if it thrives and grows correctly, and you've done the process of havracha correctly, of layering correctly, you can sever the attachment to the first tree. And now you have two trees. You have a new tree. You have the original, beautiful, healthy tree. And next to it, you have a new a tree that was originally came from a branch from the first tree, but now it's its own new healthy tree. Shekol hagerim minon havu. All converts in the future throughout time came from Avraham and Sarah, the nidchu, and they were scattered around. Those are the spiritual sparks that have been scattered around the world. The ayin be'orech ba'asara mamoros. Look at this. You can study this subject at length in the Sefer Asara Ma'amoros, Mamar Aim Kol Chai, in the section called Aim Kol Chai, Siman Vav, Zayin V'Ches, sections 6, 7, and 8. V'lochein Avraham Giyer Giyorim. And that's why Avraham went around and converted converts to believe in Hashem, not just because he wanted to help those people at that time, in his time. He wanted to, again, lay the groundwork with Sarah for all future converts. Yitzchak af hu giyer giyorim. And Yitzchak also followed this method of his father Avraham and converted converts, brought in converts in his time. Ki de'isa b'medrash, as it states in the Medrash, be'eretz megure aviv, the Torah tells us that Yitzchak settled in the land of his father's sojournings, megure aviv, but the Medrash says that word can also be understood as migiyore aviv. Yitzchak settled in the land of making converts like his father had done, and he also dedicated himself to that goal. Next paragraph. Umeata, from now that we understand all of this, Yaakov shehayu yodea, Yaakov who knew, shahalichoso lemitzrayim hoyusa, his going down to Egypt was kedei le'asov hanidochim, in order to gather in the scattered sparks, the scattered people who were destined to convert. Zovach zivochem laHakodesh Baruch Hu. He offered sacrifices at this point to Hashem, kedei sheyitain koach v'siyua levonav, so that Hashem would give strength and assistance to his sons, lelaked hakol, to gather everything that was in Mitzrayim. Umen haroi hoyo sheyomar leloke Avraham. And again, it would have been appropriate for Yitzchak to mention that he was bringing korbanos to the God of his grandfather Avraham, shehu dafka tikain, because it was Avraham who specifically established vehechin and prepared ezer v'siyua, help and assistance li'yitzias hanidochim bichlolusam, for all future scattered neshamas to be gathered in. Avraham did that original work. Afla osam ha'asidim lihiskoyer, and he laid the groundwork even for the ones who would be converted far in the future. Ela lefi shegam Yitzchak giyer giyurim, but because Yitzchak also involved himself in this holy work, tola hazvochim beYitzchak, Yaakov made the sacrifices that he brought at this time, he connected them to his father Yitzchak, lefi shechayov odem bichvod aviv yoser v'chule, because a person is obligated, as Rashi stated, to honor his father, and that takes precedence over the honor to the grandfather, who one is also obligated to honor. So what the Zera Shimshon has done for us is help us see right off the bat that we should not take for granted Rashi's comment and understand that there's much depth. There's a lot going on behind this Rashi. What's going on? Well, first of all, Zera Shimshon showed us what Rashi was bothered by in the pasuk, namely that Yaakov seemingly should have absolutely connected these korbanos to Avraham. So the whole question is, why did he pass up Avraham and mention his father Yitzchak? And then the Zera Shimshon gave us two approaches as to why Yaakov felt the relevance and the appropriateness of mentioning his father Yitzchak, and he was looking for that connection because of his obligation to honor his father Yitzchak more than his grandfather Avram. Once he understood that he had that obligation, he then searched for reasons, and the Zera Shimshon gives us the two approaches to understanding why it made sense to connect Yitzchak to the Korbanos, and to allow, so to speak, Yaakov to make that connection in order to fulfill his filial obligation to honor his father Yitzchak and have that take precedence over mentioning Avraham in connection with these Korbanos. Yasher Koch for joining with us in the learning this week. We look forward, God willing, to learn together in the Zera Shimshon on next week's Parsha.